A lone bank clerk in Minnesota refuses Jesse James's revolver at dawn. Moments later, gunfire leaves innocent townsfolk dead, and the age of the American outlaw claims new blood. The story you expect is myth. What really drove such men to violence on the frontier? The real monologues of the Wild West are far less romantic and much more revealing than legend dares admit. Jesse James's story begins long before the sound of gunfire on Division Street. Raised in Missouri's Little Dixie, his family lost nearly everything in the Civil War. As a teenager, Jesse rode with Quantrill's raiders, learning guerrilla tactics under the banner of Southern vengeance. When the war ended, the violence did not. Jesse and his brother Frank joined forces with the younger brothers, forming a gang that targeted banks and trains from 1866 to 1876. Each robbery was framed as payback for Union occupation, but the lines between retribution and greed blurred quickly. In 1876, the gang rode north to Minnesota. Their target, the First National Bank of Northfield. Inside, acting cashier Joseph Lee Haywood refused to open the safe, even as revolvers pressed against his head. Outside, townspeople, farmers, merchants, even a druggist named Thomas Hughes, armed themselves and fought back. Shots echoed down the street. Haywood was killed for his defiance. Nicholas Gustafson, a Swedish immigrant, died in the crossfire. 2 gang members fell dead in the dust, and the rest scattered through the fields, wounded and hunted. The Northfield raid shattered any illusion of the gang as folk heroes. Letters from survivors and court records speak of grief, not glory. Rewards for Jesse's capture soared, and communities banded together, determined to end the bloodshed. In the end, it was not a sheriff or a posse that stopped Jesse James, but a fellow outlaw, Robert Ford, who shot him for a reward in 1882. The age of the outlaw, once fueled by war and hardship, left behind a trail of broken towns and betrayed allegiances. Billy the Kid's legend was born in the dust and confusion of New Mexico's Lincoln County War. In 1878, the county's merchants split into rival camps, each desperate to control the flow of cattle, credit, and government contracts. On one side stood Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan, their stores backed by old money and political favors. On the other, John Tunstall and Alexander McSween, newcomers who challenged the old order. The war was not fought by seasoned soldiers, but by boys barely out of their teens, Billy among them. At just 17, Billy, then known as William Bonney, signed on with Tunstall's crew. The first shots came after Tunstall was gunned down on a lonely road. The kid and his friends, calling themselves the Regulators, swore revenge. Each killing sparked another. Deputies, store clerks, ranch hands, all took up arms for one side or the other. Court records from Lincoln County list more than 20 deaths in a single year. Pat Garrett, who would later hunt Billy, wrote that the war's violence spread like wildfire among the young. Law was little more than a rumor. Sheriffs changed sides, judges vanished, and the only certainty was that a grudge could turn fatal overnight. Billy became both hunter and hunted, slipping through jail bars twice and vanishing into the scrub. Newspapers printed his name alongside a $500 reward. In July 1881, at Fort Sumner, Pat Garrett ended the chase with a single shot. Billy the Kid, forever young, impulsive, and restless, became the face of a generation armed by someone else's feud. Charles E. Bowles preferred the pen almost as much as the pistol. Under the name Black Bart, He robbed 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches across the Sierra foothills between 1875 and 1883. Passengers described a man in a linen duster and a flour sack mask, never quick to violence but always firm. He would halt the stage with a single word, then hand the driver a note, sometimes a warning, sometimes a poem. One such verse, printed in the Sacramento Daily Union in 1883, read, "I have labored long and hard for bread, for honor, and for riches. But on my corns too long you have tread, you fine-haired sons of bitches." These lines, left at the scene of a robbery, became his calling card. Newspapers seized on the story, dubbing him the Poet Bandit. The public devoured every detail, from the clipped verses to the rumor that he never fired a shot. Victims, though, told a less whimsical story. Affidavits filed with Wells Fargo described the terror of being lined up by the roadside, pockets emptied, watches and wedding rings handed over at gunpoint, claims for stolen cash and valuables piled up in company ledgers, with some miners losing a month's wages in a single encounter. For 8 years, Black Bart vanished into the hills after each heist, leaving only his verse behind. It was a laundry tag, not a bullet, that finally ended his run. In November 1883, after a failed holdup near Copperopolis, a handkerchief dropped at the scene led detectives to a San Francisco laundry. The number stitched in red thread matched the records for Charles E. Bowles. Arrested and photographed, the man behind the mask confessed to his crimes, but never to violence. His poetry and the legend it fed lingered long after the stagecoaches stopped running. Belle Starr's world was a patchwork of shifting borders and uneasy alliances. Born Myra Maybelle Shirley in Missouri, she arrived in Indian Territory as the old order crumbled. The Homestead Act promised land and new beginnings. But for many, Cherokee families, black freedmen, and white settlers alike, it brought only confusion and conflict. Belle saw opportunity where others saw chaos. She married Sam Starr, a Cherokee with a long record of rustling, and together they turned Younger's Bend into a sanctuary for outlaws and a hub for stolen horses. Belle was no mere accessory. Court dockets from Fort Smith list her name repeatedly between 1883 and 1889, not as a bystander, but as the architect of theft rings that crossed tribal lines. She bribed officials, negotiated with rival gangs, and kept lawmen guessing. Federal marshals called her the Bandit Queen, but newspapers often painted her with a sneer, branding her a virago and mocking her boldness. In a world where women were expected to mind the hearth, Belle ran networks that spanned the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Creek nations, moving stolen stock under the noses of tribal police and U.S. Marshals alike. Her cabin at Younger's Bend became a meeting ground for the desperate and the dangerous. Stolen horses from Kansas, harnesses from Oswego, even fugitives from Missouri passed through her gates. Each arrest brought headlines, but convictions were rare. Witnesses vanished. Evidence slipped away, and Belle walked free more often than not. The dispossession sweeping Indian Territory meant more than lost land. It meant a constant churn of people and property, and Belle's operations thrived in the confusion. In February 1889, her luck ran out. Belle Starr was shot dead on a muddy road. Her murder was never solved. The press speculated wildly, blaming jealous lovers, feuding neighbors, or betrayed partners. No one was ever convicted. Her epitaph in the Fort Smith Times read simply, "A woman who knew no law but her own." Pinkerton agents worked in shadows and silence, tracking outlaws across hundreds of miles. Every movement depended on the telegraph. Field operatives sent coded messages to local clerks, who relayed sightings and train schedules in real time. A Pinkerton cable from 1875 describes agents waiting at junctions, comparing rail logs to the gang's last known direction. When a train robbery was suspected, agents and railroad men synchronized watches, cross-checking timetables to predict the next likely target. Sometimes, Wells Fargo deployed reinforced cash vaults in express cars, guarded by armed men and hidden behind locked compartments. Anonymous reports in the agency's files mention agents boarding trains in plain clothes, blending in with passengers until a signal arrived. Each telegram, each schedule, closed the gap between law and outlaw. The Pinkertons' network, built on speed and secrecy, became the model for modern pursuit, turning the hunt for criminals into a matter of minutes, not days. Government reports and railroad company ledgers tell a story that rarely makes the dime novels. In the early 1870s, annual tallies of train and stagecoach robberies sometimes topped 100 across the frontier. By 1900, that number had dropped to fewer than 20 a year. Wells Fargo records from the 1880s log hundreds of incidents and tens of thousands lost. But by the turn of the century, insurance claims and reward postings had dwindled to a trickle. The risk of robbing a train or a stagecoach no longer promised riches or fame, just a high chance of capture. As law enforcement grew more coordinated and railroads invested in security, the outlaws' world shrank. Newspapers, once eager to celebrate bandits, turned their attention elsewhere. The figures in government ledgers and company books chart not just a decline in crime, but a fading appetite for outlaw celebrity. The Wild West, as it had been known, was closing its doors. Frontier lawlessness was not legend. It was the lived reality of ordinary people facing scarcity, risk, and shifting justice. Today, as inequality and rapid change drive desperation worldwide, the old questions of survival and morality remain. The Wild West never fully disappeared. It simply found new frontiers. Thanks for watching.